Are you ready?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right, so we're going to be learning about the refrigeration cycle. Do you guys want to learn about that? Isn't that exciting?
Yes.
I know what you pay the money for? Oh, man.
$8,000.
Okay. We're also going to learn. We're going to learn about pressures and temperatures, superheat, and subcooling, and the delta T.
The Delta variant.
Not the delta variant, the delta T. Okay, so refrigeration starts off with 4 components. 4. Count them. 4. The compressor, the condenser, the metering device, and the evaporator. Those 4 components have not changed in 120 years. They've used the same components to make a refrigeration cycle and make it work. Okay? These still 4 components, you still need these 4 components to make a refrigeration system or air conditioning system, right? Did you know that?
Mine also now.
Okay, so the compressor. The compressor is the device that compresses. That's the best description of it. It compresses. The compressor compresses vapor refrigerant. Vapor. So it's refrigerant in the vapor state. Okay? So we'll get more into that. The condenser. Now the condenser is the component that rejects heat. So as the refrigerant travels through the condenser, it comes from the compressor, which is vapor. It travels through the condenser and it cools down and it turns into a liquid. So it turns into a liquid. In the condenser, it also rejects the heat. And anytime you have a change of state, you give up the heat, it turns from a vapor to a liquid. Okay? So it also condenses. So that would be another word for the condenser. It condenses. The refrigerant condenses in the condenser. Okay? You guys understand that?
Can you repeat again, please?
The condenser, the refrigerant condenses in the condenser.
You're talking about the Freon?
Yeah, the refrigerant,
Okay.
not the Freon.
Doing the same thing.
Same. Kind of.
You guys are gonna make them.
What is Freon?
Freon is for the car, right?
But that's technically refrigerant.
The refrigerant, Freon is also
Freon is a trade name. Okay.
Gotta be in the tree.
Yeah.
Sure.
So it's a refrigerant. So it will change state. Anytime you have a change of state, you have a release of heat or rejection of heat. So the condenser will reject the heat. Now we come to the metering device. The metering device could be either a expansion valve, like so, a piston, or a capillary tube. All this does is it restricts the refrigerant flow. So once it's turned into a liquid, it comes into the metering device or the capillary tube or the piston, and it restricts the flow. So as it restricts the flow, it drops the pressure immediately right after this. So as the pressure drops, so does the boiling point of the refrigerant. So it immediately starts to boil off once it comes out of the metering device. Okay, it starts to boil. When I say boil, it's boiling at a low temperature. It's boiling at maybe 20 degrees. Okay, but that's just a characteristic of the refrigerant. It boils at low temperatures. Okay. Then we come to the evaporator. Here's a couple of different evaporators. Maybe you knew that that was an evaporator. Ever see one of those? Yeah. Then a small refrigerator. Okay, a coil evaporator. These are evaporators in a refrigeration system. And here's like a regular slant coil and a coil. Okay, what happens in the evaporator with the refrigerant, the metering device, which is right here in that evaporator, right in front of that evaporator. So as soon as it hits that metering device, the pressure drops and the refrigerant starts to boil at a low temperature. In this case here, it's boiling at maybe 40, 45 degrees. Okay, it hits that, and then just all that 45 degree refrigerant, which is a mixture of vapor and refrigerant, it starts to boil as it goes through the evaporator. So the refrigerant actually does something in the evaporator. What do you think it does?
It evaporates.
It evaporates. That's why they would call it an evaporator, right? Okay. You understand that? As it evaporates, it also absorbs heat. So this is going to be absorbing the heat from the house, let's say. As it absorbs the heat, it helps the refrigerant boil off, and the refrigerant absorbs the heat, and the heat travels through the system, later to be rejected. Okay, so the gauge manifold and the pressure chart for the app that you download go together. Okay, so for each refrigerant and each temperature, there is a different pressure. Okay, so we have a plethora of refrigerants nowadays. Back when I was doing this, we only dealt with about 3 refrigerants, and that was it. So we could pretty much go on any system and know exactly where the pressure should be. But nowadays, because we have all this different types of refrigerants, you're going to need that pressure temperature chart or the app, right? They've got the app, right?
What's the app?
What app? Boring. Yeah.
Is there like a one called like Downpost or something like that?
Yeah, and you're probably gonna have to download a couple different ones, because Boring is only gonna cover the ones that they manufacture. So if the manufacturer is National Refrigerants, they're gonna have some refrigerants that are only they make. Or if it's gonna be Icon or Icor, they're all different manufacturers, so they may have 1 or 2 refrigerants that are not going to be on the Boring. Okay. Moving right along. Okay, each pressure has a corresponding temperature. I just said that. At the point at which refrigerant is changing from a liquid to a vapor or from a vapor to a liquid. So when the change of state occurs in the refrigeration system, it corresponds on the chart itself. So the chart itself is going to be telling you at what temperature that refrigerant is changing state. Whether it's going from a liquid to a vapor or a vapor to a liquid. Okay. So how many states of matter do we have?
3.
3 states of matter. And they are?
Vapor,
Solid, liquid, gas.
Yeah. Okay. Vapor, solid, and, okay. Good. Here's one for you. When a substance changes from a solid to a vapor, what's that called?
Evaporate.
When it skips the liquid stage.
Oh, from liquid to, from solid to vapor?
Yeah. What?
A transformation.
Called something, yeah.
Cold something.
Yeah, it's called sublimation.
Close something.
Okay.
Sublimation is what happens with dry ice. We put dry ice on the ground, and it never turns to a liquid. It automatically just changes to a vapor. So you never see any liquid. Whoa. Learned something, huh? That was for free. That was,
That's from solid to vapor?
yeah.
So what about solid to liquid? That's nothing.
Solid to liquid is melting. And liquid to vapor is vaporizing. Okay, so the refrigerant changes from a liquid to a vapor on the low pressure side of the system, the low pressure side. So we have, as we can see, our gauges have two different gauges, right? We have a low pressure and a high pressure. So both of those pressures are going to be relevant. So this is happening on the low pressure side of the system in the evaporator, where it's actually changing from a liquid to a vapor. You got that? You understand that?
Yeah.
Am I going too fast?
And then from vapor to liquid, would that be in the condenser?
Okay, the refrigerant changes from a vapor into a liquid on the high pressure side of the system in the condenser. Here's some condensers for you. Here's a condenser. Ooh, everybody see one of those?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Everybody see one of those?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh. That's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, so that's what happens in the condenser. It's going to change back into a liquid in the condenser. And it's going to reject the heat from the inside of the structure. The heat that was picked up from the evaporator. So as this evaporator absorbs the heat, that heat gets rejected out of the condenser. Ooh. Okay. When the refrigerant changes from a liquid to a vapor, it is also called the saturation point. Okay, so the saturation point, or boiling point, or evaporating point, this happens in the evaporator. Once the refrigerant is 100% vapor, any more heat that it absorbs is called superheat.
And the other one's latent heat or whatever?
No, this is superheat. So the saturation point is the point on the PT chart. It's also the boiling point if it's in the evaporator. Okay, so this is all happening on the low side of the system, the low pressure side, right? Okay, so as that refrigerant starts to travel out of the evaporator, it's 100% vapor now. Now it can, once it picks up any more heat above that saturation point, it's called superheat. Super, so remember super, what happens? What's super?
More.
Superman.
Superman, where does Superman go?
The sun. Or the sky.
The sun?
The highest
He's powered by the sun.
He's usually up, right?
Okay.
Look, in the sky. It's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's Superman. Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. I grew up on Superman.
But if you had kryptonite too.
Okay, so superheat is higher than the saturation point. Right? I know it sounds funny, but you guys got to remember that. When I go over to the advanced lab and they can't determine, they can't figure out which one's superheat, which one's subcooling, and all this stuff. It's like, oh man. So that's why I'm trying to get you guys to remember. Okay, superheat is
Superman.
Superman. Suction line temperature. minus the evaporator temperature, or the saturation temperature. The evaporator temperature, surface temperature of the evaporator is pretty much the saturation temperature of that refrigerant. So we're gonna take a temperature on that line. Let me stop there in a minute. Let me make things a little easier. You see these gauges that you got, these nice gauges that you got in your, nice. Isn't it interesting? Isn't it, we wanna learn how to read these because these are the tools of the trade. These are the staple of our trade. This is what we see when we see somebody walking down the road or walking in a mall or walking on a job, and we see these and we know that they're a brother, right? They're a brother, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you see somebody wearing them around their neck, like so, what is that?
Professional.
They're a brother, right?
Professional brother.
Yeah, professional. Union brother, how's that? Journeyman brother. So how can you tell somebody that's in the medical field?
They got a
Yes,
nurse.
stethoscope.
They got a stethoscope around their neck. Oh, a dead giveaway, huh? Just like these are dead giveaway for refrigeration, air conditioning, right?
And they're girls.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna shock some of you. The pressures that we're gonna read on these gauges, I really don't care. I don't care what the pressures are.
Why you afraid?
Good question. Why do I carry them? Because what do I need from the pressures?
The temperature.
The temperature. These are all for getting a temperature. That's all we do in our trade. That's all we're concerned about. That's what we do. We are temperature engineers. We're not pressure engineers. I could care less. Whatever the pressures are, it's what I'm looking for is the temperature. We're gonna take temperatures of every part of that refrigeration system to determine what's happening in that system at any given time. And we're gonna take a lot of temperature readings. And you say, why do we gotta take so many temperature readings? Why does a doctor have to take so many readings when you go to the doctor?
Because you're always changing.
It's better diagnosed.
Yep, so he can find out exactly what's going on. If you just went in the doctor and said, I don't feel so good,
So you need surgery.
and the doctor said, oh, well, I know what you got the flu,
COVID, he's gonna say COVID.
or you got COVID. He's gotta know the symptoms, he's gotta know what your body's doing at certain given time, right? So we are just like doctors, we have to take a lot of temperature measurements and determine what's exactly happening in that system. And once you learn what's basically happening in the refrigeration system, you're gonna be able to troubleshoot any type of refrigeration system, whether it's a water fountain, or it's a big chiller, package unit on a commercial building.
Well, we never do that, right? Since we're like residential.
No, we teach commercial. We teach commercial, because there's really there's money in commercial, in residential, but commercial is gonna keep you busy all year round. With refrigeration, one of the things about refrigeration is those refrigerators, they run year round, right? So you're always gonna be working on refrigeration. Air conditioning, you have heating that you have to deal with in the winter time. Okay? So as we go through this, we're gonna look at superheat, and the superheat, we're gonna actually take the temperature of the suction line and determine how warm that vapor refrigerant is, because that's gonna be key in diagnosing the system. Okay, when the refrigerant changes from a vapor to a liquid, it's also called the saturation point. Now that's going to correspond on your PT chart. Or it's going to be called the condensing point because it's happening in the condenser. Once a refrigerant is 100% liquid, any more heat that it gives up is called subcooling. Not that, subcooling. So, subcooling, it's got in parentheses, the condenser actually rejects heat, and that's what causes it to change from a vapor to a liquid, right? Okay, so remember subcooling is lower than the saturation temperature on the high side. Subcooling.
So it's basically the opposite of superheat.
Yep. Submarine, lower. Subterranean, all the different sub words we use, right?
So.
Oh.
What?
Color answer.
Subcooling is what?
Submarine.
Subheat?
Submarine.
Submarine. Sub.
Like
Lower. Lower.
Like subway.
Lower. Okay, subcooling is the condenser temperature, which is the saturation temperature, minus the liquid line temperature. So we're gonna take temperature of the liquid line coming out of the condenser and find out how much subcooling. Colin.
Shut up.
There you go.
Yeah?
Stay on mute.
He's like, I was.
Stay on mute.
It's not on mute? Hello?
No, it's not on mute.
Oh,
I'm hearing everything that's going on at your house.
It's absolutely fine.
Okay, so we're gonna take the temperature of the liquid line, and we'll see where they are and located and stuff. And you guys will get more used to it once you actually do some hands-on and actually look at that and seeing where it's at, following the refrigeration system and what goes where. Okay, so superheat is measured in degrees Fahrenheit, and it is checked on the suction line. Ooh, I know, they both look the same, huh?
How do you tell which one?
It's usually the suction line this is easy, is the cold copper line. Usually the biggest line, and it's cold.
Do you touch it or?
Yeah, see it? It's right there, it's cold. Yeah. Okay, so the liquid line, subcooling is measured in degrees Fahrenheit, and it is checked out on the liquid line of the system. And that's usually the warm line, and it's usually a smaller line than the suction line. Okay? I know, somebody going, oh, come on, really? I
Steve, is
know.
it the cold one that gets the, which one gets the insulate?
The cold one?
Cold one.
So this, the liquid line usually the bigger, colder one?
Yeah,
Okay.
So it's super heat.
yeah, that's the suction line. No, not the liquid line.
Super heat's cold.
What'd you say?
Super heat's cold.
No, the big one is the suction line. You said the liquid line. The liquid line is the warmer one.
So it's the opposite.
Yeah.
Subcooling's cold.
Big one cold, little one warmer.
So subcooling is cold or hot?
Subcooling is warm.
Okay.
Whoa.
It's the opposite.
Subcooling is warm.
So when the AC.
Superheat is cold.
That is.
Why did I do that?
So is it confusing yet?
Question, when the AC is off, how's the state, liquid or gas?
Both,
Or both?
yeah. It's just a
When
mix,
when
yeah.
it's off, and the system is still in liquid
Yeah, liquid and vapor.
and when you turn it on, so it's the cycle.
starts
It just moves around, yeah. Okay. So in this diagram, this is like an air handler, this is the furnace right here. And your evaporator coil right here, it's connected with the lines out to the outside condensing unit, just like we have out in the back there. Condensing unit, evaporator. Check it out. Cool.
Will we do any, hands-on with the gauges? Mess with it.
Why?
Just asking, That's curious.
Well, I don't really care what the pressures are.
Well, for the temperature.
Just to know how to use the tool.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it. You're gonna get hands on.
Yeah.
Maybe not here,
But somewhere.
but over there.
Alright.
Okay, so the suction line contains superheated vapor. Superheated vapor,
So that's
refrigerant, leaving the evaporator. The liquid line contains subcooled liquid, refrigerant, leaving the condenser. Okay. So memorizing this stuff isn't gonna work for you. You gotta know this stuff,
That's the same thing.
Well, isn't that,
huh?
it's like if you memorize it, that you know it?
No. You gotta, this has to be second nature to you. Did you, how do you tie your shoes?
I memorized how to tie it.
I don't have shoelaces. I just tie
You
them.
memorize how to, but then how do you do you have to go back in your memory banks and remember how to tie your shoes every morning?
Mm-mm.
No, cause I memorized it like a long time ago, so.
You memorize it a lot of times.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's second nature,
I'm talking about like, you know how walking, you don't think about it
yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Sometimes I do.
Okay, so, like I said, it's not enough to be memorized. You're gonna start off trying to memorize it, but in order, you gotta understand this. And it's gotta be second nature, okay? And you'll get there. I mean, it's not gonna happen today. I guarantee it. Ooh,
Before we end this course, yeah?
oh yeah.
Oh,
Wait, so is when refrigerant's in the evaporator, it's cold, and when it's in the condenser, it's hot?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay, why is superheat and subcooling necessary? Why? Why? I'll tell you why. Because he's weird.
Kind of like.
looks like Colin, huh? Looks like it, man.
Okay. So put this in your memory bank.
He's getting off.
Superheat ensures only vapor enters the compressor, because the compressor is what kind of pump?
A compressing pump.
What is it? What does it compress and what does it pump?
Refrigerant.
Pumps vapor.
In what state?
Liquid. No.
California. This is California. What state?
Vapor? Vapor.
Vapor only.
Yes.
Vapor.
Because if it's liquid, that's bad, right?
Huh?
If it's compressing in liquid, that's bad.
You need it.
Yes. Compressing liquid doesn't work because liquid does not compress. This is what happens to a compressor when it compresses liquid, or tries to compress liquid.
Whoa, pretty bad.
That's at the bottom of the compressor when they unbolted this.
And
Those are the pieces of it left.
Messed up.
Yes.
Does it?
That's why we need superheat, and that's why there has to be superheat present before it enters the compressor. Okay? Okay, now subcooling, making sure we have subcooling ensures that there's 100% of liquid entering the metering device at the expansion valve. Now, the metering device on the liquid line, say you're going this way and this is liquid, and you hit that metering device right here. We're going to put it right here, that metering device. Now, technically what happens with that refrigerant after it leaves the metering device, there's about 25% vapor, which is called flash gas. And 75% is liquid.
That's when it's entering the metering device?
What?
Is that when it's entering the metering device?
That's when it's leaving.
Okay.
That's when it's leaving. This is 100% liquid, right here. 100% liquid. So as it leaves, that's usually where it is. Now it could be a little different. It could be 40-60, it could be 80-20, but we're not really concerned about that. You have to, the system has to see this, and the evaporator has to see that in order for that refrigerant to flow through that evaporator at the correct rate and absorb the maximum amount of heat that it can. Okay, so if, for instance, we don't have any subcooling, if we've lost our subcooling, then that means that at this point, it's not 100%. Okay, so what's going to happen over here when it goes out of the metering device? So suppose you have 90%.
90% liquid going in?
Yeah, and
Well,
10% vapor.
Then they drop down to 70.
It'll be all jacked up, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, it might be 50-50.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to have 100%, we have to have a 100% full column of liquid hitting that metering device in order for the expansion to happen at the proper rate. So we're gonna check subcooling and we're gonna check superheat to ensure those two things are there and they're at the correct range. You got it now? Okay, so we have in this cartoon here, we have the evaporator up here, we have the drain lines for the condensate, which anytime you are going to cool the air, you're going to condense moisture onto that coil, which needs to be drained off. So the coolant lines or the refrigerant lines go from the evaporator coil to the condensing unit. And there's the coil, here's the compressor. I mean, you know all that stuff, right? That's pretty much, it's all in the book there. The condensing unit, okay? I don't even know why it's there. Okay, check it out. Ooh, it's moving. This is moving. Okay, so here's your expansion valve right here. See that? And here's your compressor. Right? Your condenser and your evaporator. Now you can tell by the color of the elbows, the arrows, they're red, meaning they're hot, and they're cooled coming out of the expansion valve. So as you leave the compressor, this is hot vapor. Hot, superheated vapor. Hot, hot, cool, about 200 degrees, okay? As it travels through the condenser, it starts to cool off as it rejects the heat. So the condenser discharges its heat into the surrounding air. So as it starts to do that, it starts to become liquid. And when it's 100% liquid, probably right here, it becomes subcooled. Okay, so as it becomes liquid and subcooled, it hits that metering device and it comes out of the metering device as a mixture. You can tell it's a mixture because there's two different color arrows there. Woo! So then it travels through the evaporator and it picks up heat. So it removes heat from the surrounding air. As it removes heat, it turns completely into vapor again. So here's 100% vapor returning to the compressor.
So it's constantly changing.
It's constantly doing this.
So when it's,
That, that blue line right there, that indicates the low side of the system and the high side of the system. So that's where it changes, that's where the pressures change. It's in the expansion valve and in the compressor. That exciting? Getting that already?
so those are like the four main components of an AC unit.
The what?
The four main you were talking about?
Yeah, the four main, this is the expansion valve, the compressor, and the evaporator and condenser. Okay, we'll take a break. Guys come back on Zoom at 10 or 11:10. Okay? Got it?